I'm John, and this is Shaman's Tent. And today, this is my very first video in this series, and I'm going to talk to you about my favorite topic. I'm going to talk about shamanism. I'm going to talk about what shamanism is, what it might not be. Seems to be a very popular topic these days, and I'll talk a little bit about that, why it's become so popular today. And so this will hopefully give you some ideas. When you think about shamanism, you'll be a little bit more informed and know what it is and what it isn't. And so I'm going to cover shamanism at a very high level because it's something you could study for many lifetimes and never get to the bottom of. But I'm going to talk about it from four different perspectives. One is, what is the meaning of the word shaman? Where does the word shaman come from? And that, obviously that gives us shamanism. I'm going to talk about, and I'm referring to notes here because I want to make sure I hit all of these points, although I could probably talk about shamanism for hours without stopping. I'm very passionate about this topic. I'm going to talk about the components of shamanism as a practice. What is it that shamans are doing? What is it when, what separates shamanism from other spiritual practices? I'm going to talk about the shamanic impulse, and this is where I'm going to get into why I think shamanism has become so popular these days. And then I'm going to wrap it up with the shamanic worldview, how, in general, shamanic people see the world and view spirituality and all of those things. So let's get into it. So what is shamanism? Where does the word shaman come from? What does it mean? That sort of thing. And you might get a picture in your head. You might get a picture of an indigenous person somewhere in the world, in Mongolia and Siberia and South America and anywhere, the Americas, and you'd be right, because many cultures practice shamanism. They have figures that we call a shaman. And the word, it is an English word, not originally. It's a loan word. It came from other languages into English, and it came into English from Russian and German. There are a lot of people who will say that the word shaman comes from the Tungus people of Siberia, and that it is a word that means sort of a spiritual person who sees in the dark or who sees clearly, that sort of thing. And they're not exactly wrong about that. It came from the Tungus people into Russian and German. From Russian and German, it came into English. This happened over many years and a very long time ago. So it is a loan word like many words we have in English. It didn't originate, but probably more than half of the words in the English language didn't originate in what we would consider English today. Before that, though, where did the Tungus people get the word? Well, we don't really know, because there hasn't been, as far as I know, there hasn't been extensive linguistic study of the word. And what we have found, though, is that the word, or words very close to it, exist in a whole lot of languages, including some that are dead languages, like Akkadian. So lots of Semitic languages have the word shaman in it, and it basically does mean a religious functionary or spiritual functionary. And so, we see it there. We see it in Pali, which is the language of that Buddha spoke. We see it in Chinese language. And so it's very likely that this word has been around before any modern languages existed, and that it is a word that in some form existed in a precursor to all of these languages. But there was a lot of cultural interchange among people many years ago. So we don't know exactly the origin of the word, but we do know that there are forms of the word that exist in many different languages, and shamans exist in many different languages. So, and the way we use it in English is that shaman is a spiritual functionality that practices shamanism. I realize I'm using the word to define the word, and I'm going to talk about what shamanism is. So it's a spiritual functionary, and there are lots of words in other languages that we would describe. We would put the label shaman on this person, but it might be different in their language. So, that, for example, the kahuna in Hawaii or the curanderos, and I may be pronouncing that wrong, in South America, these are shamanic people practicing shamanism, but obviously it's a different word in their language. And even in Mongolian and in other Siberian languages, the word is different. So that's sort of the definition of the word. And like I said, it does carry the implication of one who sees in the dark or one who sees clearly, because there is a function of shamanism to be a seer, right? We have to in order to heal, in order to do other kinds of work, we have to be able to see. Let's talk about shamanism as a practice. So I said that, a shaman is a spiritual functionary, somebody who performs a spiritual function for some group of people that involves practicing shamanism. So what does that mean? What are the components of shamanism? So, anthropologists have gone around the world and looked at all of these, what we call shamanic cultures that still practice shamanism, as well as looking at ancient practices from people that no longer exist. Cultures that don't, not people that don't exist, but cultures that don't exist anymore. And what they found is that there is a core set of practices. Everything is overlaid with culture. Everything people practice within the context of their culture. But there are three major components that we can say comprise shamanism. And somebody put the label core shamanism on this. And so I'll use that term. So core shamanism consists of three things. First, core shamanism involves using altered states of consciousness. So a shamanic person, a shamanic practitioner, or a shaman is going to alter their consciousness somehow. And there are lots of different ways to do this. Most cultures use some sort of rhythm, whether that's drumming or singing or dance, to drive a specific brain state. Many people are familiar with the psychoactive plants that some shamanic cultures use to enter altered states of consciousness. It's getting the brain out of the ordinary state of consciousness so the mind can perceive things that are non-physical. So that's the first component, altered states of consciousness. The second component is shamans travel in spiritual realms. And shamans in general recognize different worlds. There's a core belief around the middle world where we live, and there's an upper world and a lower world, and these don't really equate to heaven and hell in the same way they do in some religious practices. But shamans have to travel in different worlds to bring back information or to affect healing or to do whatever it is that they're doing in that day. So they alter their state of consciousness so they can travel in spirit. And what happens is part of their soul body actually breaks off, not breaks off, it's still connected, but can travel outside of their body and sort of tune into different realms of consciousness, so to speak. The third component, and this is extremely important, is that shamans work with helping spirits. So I am a shamanic practitioner and teacher. When I teach, when I do healing for clients, or I do other work for clients, I am always working with helping spirits. I don't take credit for any of the work. I act as an intermediary between my helping spirits. So I work with spirits to effect healing or to gather information. And this is really, really common. And this is a core component because there are other practices where people alter their state of consciousness, such as meditation. There are other practices where people may travel in spiritual realms like astral projection. And that is not necessarily practicing shamanism. And there are lots of spiritual practices where people appeal to or pray to or contact helping spirits. It's a little bit different with shamanism in that you're working kind of one-on-one as a peer with spirits. So these three components, if these three components aren't present, you're doing something else, and that's totally fine, because clearly shamans all over the world incorporate other things from their culture. They incorporate singing and prayer and all kinds of stuff. Again, they're spiritual functionaries. In some cultures, they might take the place of religious officials, where they conduct weddings and bless babies and do naming ceremonies and all of that sort of thing. So the next topic I want to cover is the shamanic impulse. And this is really about shaman as an archetype, as a human archetype. There is this impulse that happens for human beings to awaken to the spiritual world. And frequently this is a shamanic impulse. And what makes this a shamanic impulse is that it is an impulse to awaken spiritually that is derived from crisis. So this could be individual crisis, it could be social crisis like a tribe or a country or a community, or it could be a global crisis, right? So right now, as I'm recording this, we are in the fall of 2021. We are in the midst of a pandemic, a global pandemic. And I can tell you that shamanism, in my experience, has never been as popular as it is right now. I have lots and lots of people contacting me, going through lots of things, because there is a global crisis, and there is something archetypal, there's this impulse inside human beings to awaken spiritually to handle crisis. On a personal level, this crisis could be a health crisis, a mental health crisis, a traumatic event, an injury, something like that. So in some cultures, things like getting hit by lightning would be taken as a sign, and surviving, obviously, would be taken as a sign that you are chosen or you are prepared to become a shaman. And there's a whole reason around why I think there are a couple of reasons why people awaken spiritually in response to crisis. One is we're wired to do that. There are brain structures that accommodate spiritual thought and spiritual connection, and that is a survival mechanism for us. The other reason is a little more esoteric, in that going through crisis shakes up your constitution. It shakes your mind up. It eventually, when you come through it, makes you more flexible. It allows you to do the things that shamans do if you are somebody who has that impulse awaken in them. These days, it's very easy to take a course in shamanism, or read books about shamanism, or watch a YouTube video about shamanism, and people can sort of enter the space and learn some of the practices simply because they're interested in it. But those people will generally not become a shamanic practitioner, somebody who practices shamanism as a personal path, or as a healing practice, or professionally, or teaching it, that sort of thing. Because if they haven't gone through the crisis that forces the awakening, there's just some things that are lacking. So everybody I know who is and I know lots and lots of people who practice shamanism, they have all been through crisis in their life, and that includes myself. So, near-death experiences, PTSD is a very common one. All kinds of stuff forces us. So this is the shamanic impulse. So the last section I want to cover, and I plan on doing lots more videos down the road where I will go more in depth. This is a very high-level overview, as I said, and I will go more in depth into some of these topics, and I will do probably some more practical stuff as well. But I wanted to start out and set the tone. So when I talk about shamanism, you understand what I think I'm talking about, what I mean when I talk about shamanism, or I describe shamanic practice or people who are shamans. The shamanic worldview, and I have sort of divided this up into 3 parts, and this is an artificial division. This is just me organizing how the shamanic worldview kind of makes sense to me. Other people will have different ways of organizing this, but these things in general are very true from everybody that I know and everything I've read and everything I've seen and heard. Very common to the shamanic worldview. There's a reason for that, because when you spiritually awaken and you start to practice, or not awaken, like, I'm not saying I'm woke or I'm fully enlightened or anything like that. I just mean when I awaken to that, the fact that there is more to this world than just physical reality, and start practicing shamanism and learn it and get in depth and go through initiations and do apprenticeships and train for years and do all of these things, there is a truth, there is a reality that is revealed to you, that is revealed to everybody who goes through the same practices, whether this is objective truth or not. Again, this is something that everybody experiences. It is experiential truth. It's not something you can measure with scientific instruments, although people are trying. People are definitely, doing some research out there about brain states, about connection, and all of these things. So the worldview is really a view of reality that if you go through shamanic awakening and practice and learn shamanism, you will come to at least some point in your life, because it's just what you're going to see, and what you're going to experience. So again, I've broken these down into 3 components. The first part is that shamanism is animistic. So shamans are animists. They practice or they believe in animism, and that just means that they're, in general, animism says that every living thing has a spirit, right? Humans, birds, trees, grass, all that sort of thing. I would extend that. I would say that everything that we can experience has a spiritual component, and that includes things that we would not consider living, like rocks and rivers and organizations and marriages and that sort of thing. So everything has a spiritual component. And I cannot think of an exception to that. Everything has a spiritual component, and some things have a physical component, meaning I have a physical body and I have a spiritual component. But an organization you might not think of that as having a sort of physical presence, although I guess it does. Or a relationship might not have a physical presence, or a concept, that sort of thing. But there is a spiritual component to that. So I like to say, in my view of this, is that everything is a spirit, not everything has a spirit. Everything is a spirit. Everything has a spiritual component. And there are lots of spirits, when we talk about not just ghosts and angels and gods and goddesses and all of these things, there are lots of things you can experience in shamanic trance that you can't experience in physical reality. So there are what we call non-human people, I guess, for lack of a better term. And the variety of spirits that you can experience in shamanic trance is, as far as I know, infinite. I have experienced so many different types of spirits. The second part is that everything and everyone is connected. Underneath it all, we are all connected to everything. So I like to think of it as there's sort of like this single light, and we'll call that divinity. You could call it God, you could call it the universe, you could call it the universal mind. Hard to put a label on it, because once you put a label on it, like God or what have you, there's a whole bunch of concepts around it, and the concepts all limit this idea, because we're human beings and we have brains, and our brains are limited, and we could not possibly conceive of the source of the universe. But the way I imagine it is with this metaphor. There is this single light, and that light hits a prism, and the prism spreads that light out into beams of all different colors and going in all different directions and all of those things. So these beams that are split by this prism all appear to be individual. They all appear to be different beams, different colors, all of this stuff. And but they are all connected to the original light source. If you were to cut off the original light source, well, these beams wouldn't exist. And so that is how I sort of conceive of everything and everyone, that we are all beams that are aspects or divine sparks, or however you want to put it. It's all a metaphor, because again, the underlying reality is inconceivable as far as I know. Like, it's really hard. Some may call it ineffable, like you can't really put a name on it. And so that's why it's very challenging to sometimes talk about that. And I use the metaphor of the prism. So you cut off the light and nothing exists, but you can't really cut off the light. So everything exists and everything is interconnected in that way. And it's really important to realize that, because we live in a world where humans, modern humans and people living in urban environments and all that sort of thing, can be very disconnected from everything that's going on. We can be disconnected from the environment. We can be disconnected from, other people. And this is sort of a false idea, this idea of separation. Some people call the idea of separation ego, and treat the ego as if it's evil and all of this stuff. And I will get into that in another video. And the third part of this shamanic worldview that is in common is that we humans are a part. We're connected to everything, but we are a part of the natural world, and we are a part of the spirit world. So we might think of ourselves as separate from nature, right? Because we live in buildings and we drive cars and we eat processed food and we do all of this stuff. But we are a part of nature. We are animals. Our bodies are animals. We have we have all of the needs that animals have to eat and sleep and reproduce and all of these things. And we are no less a part of nature than the birds and the bees and the flowers and the trees. And when we conceive that we are different, that's when we get into problems with like environmental destruction and overuse of resources and all of these things. So most people, when they go through, when they start training in shamanism and at some point along the line become very environmentally conscious, because you're like, oh, these are my brothers and sisters that I'm dumping garbage into. And the other thing is that we are also a part of the natural world. We're also a part of the spirit world. So we should not think of ourselves as separate from spirit. We are spirits. We happen to have bodies. But because our consciousness feels like it's located inside our body, and we feel like, we've taken a lot of information, not most of it, but a lot of information through our physical senses, we can get really attached to this physical body. This is not to say that we consider the physical body evil or wrong or a mistake or bad in any way. Shamans walk with a foot in each world, a foot in the spirit world and a foot in the spiritual world. Shamans throughout time have had to do things like heal people's injuries and sickness, tell tribes where and when to hunt, tell people when to plant corn, tell people when it was okay to navigate the seas, to go out fishing, that sort of thing. So they always took care of the physical aspects of the people that they were working with, as well as the spiritual aspect of the people that they were working with, because both things are important. Some people do a lot of spiritual bypassing, where they place so much importance on their spiritual life that they neglect the fact that they are living in physical reality. And this is not a great thing. This is actually a stoppage to spiritual development. So anyway, this has been What is Shamanism? And I hope this has been informative for you. I plan on doing a lot more videos in the future. I love talking about shamanism. It is my practice. It's what I do. And again, I'm John Moore, and I will talk to you next time.